Recorded live at the legendary Red Key Tavern in Indianapolis, Indiana, this is Uncle Dan's Story Hour, featuring author and screenwriter Dan Wakefield, a master of the word, and host Cy Bennett from Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. Uncle Dan's Story Hour is brought to you by Beer Brewery, with pints, growlers, and conversation at their tap room just west of Benford Boulevard on 65th Street, and faithful supporters like you. We're going to start the show tonight with a very powerful poem written and performed by Tasha Jones.
We went from pyramids to plantations to projects to penitentiaries. And you think America got love for me? We went from pyramids to plantations to projects to penitentiaries. And you think America want to see me free? I was born at 8:10, died, revived, and born again. With fight in my blood, storm and rain, war and sin. Then again, I am the statistic that the government enlisted for prison, with standardized testing, repeated helpings of failure through public school systems. The projects projected only one would erect, from city streets, SWAT meets generations of derelicts, let alone from a mother who birthed 13, and a mother's mother who bore the exact same thing. Let's not forget Prince Charming, whose abuse had substance, longed for peace but served a country that lacked justice. Point, infiltrated veins, molested blood, relaxed the complexity of pain, which left me logically to believe that if time heals, the incarceration system is doing a dang thing. Now, if we can bypass the root of plausible evolution, it would be safe to say that I was born in confusion, subjugated to the media's illusions of who I be. Which leads me to the point: rocks, water, and leaves. Follow me to the good book, where people are metaphors for trees and peace is found in the stillness of streams. Follow me to the good book, where the end is known in the beginning and the beginning is known in the end, and those who pain us most are either family or friends. Lead me beside the still waters and watch the branches on fertile trees fall like leaves because of the season. And there you will see my pop of ages rocking a congregation of these city streets with the solid rock of the coca leaf. May I borrow a line, please? My dad rocks. No, really, my dad rocks. No, really, my dad rocks. Sometimes in his weed. Sometimes he melts it, but it makes his arms bleed. Beep, beep, beep. Reverse what you heard. The natural herb can no longer satisfy the need. Cocaine baptized the weed, and the audacity of hope tried to make my pop believe he could stop. Cain killed Abel. Now what about that verse was forgot? Watch how the system depicts the second hand when you hear the tick of a time bomb stuck in a pit of a habit trying to quit. This is the last time. Baby, I'll be there, I won't forget. This is the last time. Darling, I sold the ring for a hit. This is the last time. Mama, I sold the TV. Shh. This is the last time. God help him. He's sick. No one knows who's in control, depending on the stroll, the rhythm, the catch, the taste, the smack, the feel, the look, the taste. See what the childhood remembers? The wound of the past is brought to the present figure. The man has become the preacher has turned into a pimp. Black Panther has been infiltrated by the government. The sun fell off his axis trying to orbit, traveling 135 miles per second and still falling, and we him harm with prison. I wish they could privatize the addiction. Then we can rehabilitate the illness when it duplicates and forms cellmates. Are you listening? Water, rocks, leaves. Drowns the minds of insecurities, bathe the cheek, wash the feet, weep in the garden of Gethsemane. Can I get a witness? Well, let me hear you speak. 'Cause if you don't cry out, then the rocks will cry out, and I don't want no rocks crying out for me. If you don't cry out, then the rocks will cry out, and I don't want any rocks crying out for me. We went from pyramids to plantations, to projects, to penitentiaries. And you think America got love for me. Thank you.
Wow, that's really great. And I first heard Tasha at a poetry reading that Karen Kovacic organized, and who thinks very highly of the poem. And Karen is not only a professor of English at IUPUI, she's a former poet laureate of
Absolutely.
Indiana. And this was her comment. This was her comment on Tasha's poem that you heard just now. For all who believe we're living in a post-racial society, Tasha Jones' Pyramid Plantations Project's Penitentiary offers a bracing corrective. African Americans descended from the great builders of the pyramids came largely to this country as slaves to work the plantations of our nation's founders. Ms. Jones reminds us that despite the noble rhetoric of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, the freedom promised in those documents was not available to all, and a system of racial oppression has been in place ever since, through Jim Crow, racial covenants, and housing discrimination, profiling, and police violence, and the entire prison industrial complex. As Ta-Nehisi Coates has observed, until we accept our collective biography and its consequences, we cannot be fully free. Tasha's poem challenges us to live in the truth. And I thank you, Karen, for that great, incisive commentary. And I want to tell you that Tasha is not only a powerful poet, but a powerful teacher. And I know because I have twice been to her class, and it's really a highly disciplined, intelligent, very impressive class of 8th grade boys. And I know that, Tasha, one thing you teach that I'd like you to tell about, it's not usually in the curriculum, but it's very important that you teach your 8th grade boys how to be safe.
I do. I teach a group of young men that we like to call geniuses and gentlemen. And I think sometimes attached to African American males, we don't hear that type of G. You know, we hear gangster or, another word. But the scholars that I teach and I love are gentlemen first and geniuses as well. And so those are the G's that we try to project, not only in our academia and our intellect, but also in our actions. And so when you teach and work in the inner city, you're mistaken quite frequently because of perception, because of history, because of outward appearance or whatever else. There is a lesson, not only from school teachers, but from parents for males of color. And so we teach how to speak when spoken to. We teach how to say no, sir, and yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. We teach to follow instructions implicitly. We teach how to remain calm. We teach to protect yourself, to never be in groups more than 2. Try not to walk in a cluster. Try not to be in a cluster or ride in a cluster, because that can be mistaken for not a starting lineup for a basketball team, but for a gang. And it's something that mothers have to grapple with on an occasion, or not even on occasion, but on a daily basis, and especially mothers of Black children or Latino children, and even more so with Black boys and Latino boys. And so we teach those basic instructions of you answer what you are asked, and you remain calm at all times, and your hands are in a place where they can see, and you are not aggressive, and your language, your body language is not aggressive, and that you are a gentleman first and a genius, and you can move scholarly at all times. Yeah.
Let me ask also, I know that our education system often, usually I think, leaves out the history of Black Americans. Are you able to teach that? Do you have books, or how do you teach the boys of their own heritage?
Right. I think Indiana is onto something. It took us a long time. If Gary Holland is in the room, Gary Holland was one of the persons who were the person who made sure that Indiana now has to teach ethnic studies in high schools, right? So it's a requirement in high schools now. Before then, it was not a requirement. As an educator, statistically, I have found both in the high school and in the middle school that persons who learn from within the ethnic confines tend to not only just of African American culture, but ethnicity as a whole, right? You do not subtract yourself when you're teaching that, but you do include other cultures as well. And everybody that is in the room learns, and their test scores end up going up. Their behaviors seem to be modified as well. I mean, modified in the sense of we don't have any behavior problems, and more so the interest in learning becomes greater. And so that's what I've seen, and I've used my statistics to help with passing that bill. I first taught at a public high school in Indianapolis, and I taught scholars who were first having problems passing the end of code assessment. And I was privileged enough with my principals to be able to change the curriculum to adapt it to a more cultural, acceptable curriculum. And what we found after a year of doing that, 16 weeks of accelerated learning, that the test scores, we were up 20% over the national average. The test scores shot up 20% over the national average. And then I tested again going into an all-Black school, teaching them about Latino history, Native American history, teaching not only what we have to learn with European history, but also adding African American history, Latino, Indian, as well as Asian history. And the same thing, we led the county in last year with ISTEP scores. And so that group of boys led the 8th grade county with ISTEP, and we remain an A school. So, it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I was very impressed in your class when we were discussing things and they didn't call out, or they didn't even raise their hands. They had signals of like what it meant to agree or disagree or have a question to ask. It was very impressive. I wonder if you would tell about the time that you were a teenager and you and your dad were pulled over by the police. What happened then?
Right. At the time, I was attending a church way out north, and the parishioners were looking for ways to help the community. And so my father and I went on a ride with the parishioners so they can figure out what was happening in certain areas, but they were unfamiliar with the area. The parishioners, myself, my father, who was here, we were taking them on a journey through 25th and College, 22nd, 19th, in that area, maybe 22nd and College. Even now, and if you go down to 22nd and College, I believe there is right there on the corner, there is a for sale sign or for lease sign, but there's probably like 12 bullet holes in that area, right, in that building. However, the area itself is upcoming, right? There's a new bar that's right across the street coming. There's a grocery store right around the corner. And so you can see that there are changes in the neighborhood. However, we were driving along and we got pulled over. The police pulled us over and wanted to know why 2 Caucasian men were carrying 2 African Americans, 1 female and 1 Black. And perhaps maybe I was the prostitute. And I said, me? And so it was one of those things where I teach my students how to inquire, and that is my modality. That's how I learn, right? It's hard for me to understand if I don't ask questions. And so I began to ask questions, and he began to get hostile. And, you know, the parishioners chimed in and told what we were doing, why we were there. They showed their identification, and it was over. It was over just that quick. And then the police officer said, as we were preparing to leave, while looking at me, don't be a hero, right? This kid is just a mistake. And I asked if it were really. And then what does that comment mean, really? Don't be a hero. I mean, like, I should not tell of my experience. But how many of these things happen on a daily basis? How many people like myself or athletes or tennis players or students go through this on a daily basis? And it was just an eye-opening experience. It taught me how to really trust the higher belief or the higher faith that I attest to. And it's really a test of faith and a test of love of all people, right? And beyond that, it shows me how to be protected. And when I had to learn quickly how to back off of questions, right? So, I mean, sometimes you can ask one question too many, right? Yeah.
So regarding sort of what you learned through that experience and what you teach your students in your classroom about how to be safe and how to address those situations, was there anything for you growing up that was passed to you about how to interact with confrontations like that?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm blessed to have the parents that I have, because my parents exposed me to opportunities and people and expanded my mind through culture, through learning other people. And so understanding that, I think that's what I tried to pass on to my scholars. And I tried to take them to different places so they can experience that, so they can experience different cultures and know how to address people who've come from different places than they have. And I try to make sure that all of us understand that our environment does not necessarily make up who we are. Right? It's just a component of where we are from, but not necessarily telling us where we have to stay or where we're going. And so learning that in the process is, I think, essential. So I try to expose my students to, and my children, to travel, to new cultures, new opportunities, new food, right? And so they'll learn that process. In a more simple term, I think we just have to be a well-rounded people and can't be just confined to one culture or one neighborhood or one area.
One other thing I wanted to ask, I know that you went to Paris, and there's been a long history of Black Americans going to France, really I think beginning with Josephine Baker in the 1920s, and going on through James Baldwin, who spent the last years of his life there. And so, as I remember, your parents encouraged you to go to Paris.
Absolutely.
And what did they say about it?
Right. I think we first have to even go back a little bit further in regards to the original Statue of Liberty that they sent over here for us, right? Then you know automatically that there's a different love affair for culture in regards to France. And so, well, at a very young age, I had a librarian tell me that I should be a model. But not everybody thought that I was beautiful. And my parents did, and always expressed that to me. And so my parents just reminded me on a consistent basis that I had so many things to offer, and that my beauty was not only from the outward appearance, but also from the inward appearance. And as time progressed, I did get heavily into modeling, and I was not getting as many calls as I was. I mean, I didn't get many calls, and my parents said, I think you should go to Europe, go to Paris. They love you. And I went, and they did. They loved me, right? They loved me. And I learned how to love myself deeper. And I learned how to write in love. And I learned how to see color, and not just my color, but color, period, right? Even at the Louvre, or even at the Champs-Élysées, the colors themselves are so beautiful and vibrant. And the blues were a different color of hues, you know? It was just exciting and magic. I didn't want to leave, and it was hard to come back. But
well, the most recent Black American, the writer Ta-Nehisi
Coates,
Coates, who wrote a National Book Award winner called Between the World and Me, very powerful. And he, in that book, talked about taking his 12-year-old son to Paris because he felt there he could keep him more safe than he could in this country.
Absolutely.
Did you feel
More safe?
Yeah.
Yeah, not only more safe, but free. I really felt free. Yes.
Incisive commentary. And, you know, our own favorite author here in Indiana and many parts of the world, Kurt Vonnegut, has always had some very interesting to say about this subject. We're lucky enough to have a brief recording of him speaking when he was interviewed for a CD called God Bless You, Mr. Vonnegut, where he speaks on the subject of color.
Teachers of children in the United States of America wrote this date on blackboards again and again and asked the children to memorize it with pride and joy. 1492. The teachers told the children that this was when their continent was discovered by human beings. Actually, millions of human beings were already living full and imaginative lives on the continent in 1492. That was simply the year in which sea pirates began to cheat and rob and kill them. They used human beings for machinery, and even after slavery was eliminated because it was so embarrassing, they and their descendants continued to think of ordinary human beings as machines. The sea pirates were white. The people who were already on the continent when the pirates arrived were copper-colored. When slavery was introduced onto the continent, the slaves were black. Color was everything.
I think a pretty insightful commentary in Vonnegut's way of looking beneath and across many things. Well, thank you, Tasha. And we have another distinguished guest who has written a book with the longest title I have yet seen, and it's even longer than Mark Vonnegut's title. But this title is Indiana Avenue, Life Along and Near the Avenue, and a Musical Journey from 1915 to 2015. Ragtime, blues, jazz, spiritual, bebop, doo-wop, Motown, opera, and hip-hop. And this was written by a fellow Shortridge Echo writer, Aleta Hodge, who has had a very distinguished career, graduating from Stanford and an MBA at Indiana University and Kentucky University, among many other things. She was a project manager at Eli Lilly, and she wrote health columns for the Indianapolis Star. So it's a pleasure to introduce Aleta Hodge.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And it was great to read your book about Indiana Avenue and read things that I had never heard. And I have to confess that when I was growing up here, I was in Shortridge in the 1940s, School 80 even before that, and there was only one thing I knew about Indiana Avenue. It was supposed to be a dangerous place. I didn't even know that there was music played there. I didn't know that it was internationally famous as a center for music and as a place of some of the outstanding musicians, composers, and players in the world. And one of the amazing things to me, the very first Broadway musical made up of black people was called Shuffle Along, and that was revived again in 2015. There was a musical made called The Making of Shuffle Along, and that musical had 10 Tony nominations. And the man who created this was a man from here named Noble Sissle. So, and also, I bet a lot of you have heard the song, I'm Just Wild About Harry. Well, that's who wrote it, Noble Sissel from Indianapolis and Indiana Avenue. And he also wrote, and I bet you didn't know this, the Butler fight song. So, Aleta, could you say something about Noble and the beginning of this great heritage on Indiana Avenue?
Yes, he was a preacher's kid, and he graduated from Butler. He got involved in vaudeville at an early age, and so he became a composer and a singer. And so he learned a lot about vaudeville and acting and how to be sensational and how to get a crowd involved in presentations. And so he teamed up with U.B. Blake, who was another famous producer, and they produced the first Black Broadway success story. And it's a funny story about, somebody who's running for office, politicians. And so one of the young stars of the show was Josephine Baker. That was her first performance in a New York musical. And then later, Paul Robeson joined the crew, and that was the first time that he had ever been on stage for anything. He was known for being an athlete at Rutgers University. So it made a lot of firsts in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and when I was growing up, when I was in school, 80, I used to love a singing group. How many of you heard of the Ink Spots? Well, did you know they were from Indianapolis? I never did. And I certainly didn't know that they also wrote the big hit of the Depression, the hit song of the Depression, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? So, again, a lot of these things just haven't been known enough. Well, I think also a lot of people didn't know that Hoagie Carmichael got a lot of his early training and musical education on Indiana Avenue. And again, of the many millions of things I didn't know that during the heyday of Indiana Avenue, that whites were not allowed to go in the clubs there, except as performers. So, in our last show, we had my old friend David Amram from New York, and when he was stationed at Camp Breckenridge in Kentucky, he came up to Indiana Avenue to play. He's a white guy. He played, and he also, in New York, that was one of the only desegregated art forms was jazz. He played with Dizzy Gillespie and a number of great jazz musicians, and he was able to go up there. But Aleta, you had a very interesting thing in your book where some wealthy guys from Fort Wayne came down to hear the music on Indiana Avenue, and there's Stutz Bearcat. And that was that was like better than a Cadillac, and they weren't allowed to go in the clubs.
Right. Yeah, a big, tall, colored policeman stopped them, and they were ready to walk in the door and he told them, well, you can't come in here. And they said, well, why not? We've come all this way, and we've got the money, and why won't you let us in? And he said, well, if I let you in, the owner of the club could lose his liquor license and the business. And so there was double discrimination enforced by the police.
Yeah.
And so even though you had these world-renowned musicians that everybody wanted to hear, you had restrictions on who could hear them and where they could hear them. Now, if they wanted to go to a white nightclub or a private party given by whites, then they could see them there. So these guys angrily sped off in their Stutz Bearcat, which was also produced just a few blocks away on Capitol and 10th Street. Yeah.
Well, two of the most famous jazz men in the 1950s and onward, and I met one of them. I met J.J. Johnson in New York City, and I was very impressed to meet him and talk with him. And I knew he'd gone to Addicts, but I didn't know he played on Indiana Avenue. I didn't know anybody played on Indiana Avenue. And also, even in a way, more of an impact on music was Wes Montgomery, who his guitar compositions and styling and playing really revolutionized jazz guitar. So again, these are things that we ought to be proud of here. They're from Indianapolis, and
a lot of Butler graduates as well among that bunch. Or what was the school that became part of Butler University?
Oh, the Jordan School of Music. Yeah. Many jazz performers went there. The list is too long. You have to read the book.
And the one other thing in the kind of historical part of your book I wanted to mention, because it seemed to me to really explain a lot of things that have happened and things happening since, was the fact that when a group of middle-class black people here wanted to start a nice community and build nice homes, that they prevailed and did that, but none of them were able to get a mortgage in Indiana.
Right. Yes, this is the area around 64th and Grandview on the west side of town. And one of the classmates from Addicts had acquired this land from someone who previously had a farm there. And they decided that they would build a housing development and sell it to their friends who were mostly from Addicts. And so, they had all these plans and wanted to get mortgage, and then they were denied in the state of Indiana. And so my aunt and uncle had to get a mortgage from Colorado. And they were both government employees. She worked for the Internal Revenue Service, and my uncle worked for Indianapolis Public Schools and had, sparkling credit record. And he had served in the military. And so that neighborhood is still there and still thriving. And so there were a lot of notable people who lived there. The great-granddaughter of Madam Walker, the Bundles lived there. Dr. Clarence Lucas, a general practitioner, and just a wonderful neighborhood over there.
Yeah.
Well, and there's so much rich history involved with Addicts that we know about. We have this wonderful museum downtown, but especially you mentioned the military record of your uncle, was it? Could you talk a little bit about the connection between Addicts and the war effort, specifically with the Tuskegee Airmen?
There's a nice exhibit at the Addicts Museum on the 10th Street side of the school, on the side where the Starbucks is. And so Mr. Arthur Carter, he was one of, I think there were about 11 guys who went to Addicts who became part of the Tuskegee Airmen, and so there's a nice exhibit of them in the museum. And they also became civic leaders and business leaders in Indianapolis.
And Arthur Carter, even, Dan, I thought you would appreciate this. Arthur Carter was a recipient of the Boy Scout Silver Beaver Award, which is a very well-respected award. But.
Well, I was an Eagle Scout, but I never became a Silver Beaver. Just one other thing I'll add to that I got interested in that situation of the difficulty in mortgages, and I found out that black veterans didn't get all the advantages of the GI Bill after World War II. What I learned was black veterans haven't been able to make use of the housing provisions of the GI Bill for the most part. Banks generally wouldn't make loans for mortgages in black neighborhoods, and African Americans were excluded from the suburbs by a combination of deed covenants and unformed racism. In short, the GI Bill helped foster a long-term boom in white wealth, but did almost nothing to help blacks to build wealth. We are still living with the effects of that exclusion today and will be for a long time. So I think we've learned a lot in this, and I want to say that we present this as something for our education, for ourselves to know and appreciate our own history and the challenges that come out of that. And our great saxophone player, Sophie Fott, who I've often said is the soul of the show, will play something that maybe in the future we can sing together. We'll be together again. My friend John Meyer was, for many years, served with the Veterans Administration, and he was Director of Vocations and Rehabilitation for Disabled Veterans, and he now does noble work, tremendous work for the American Legion in finding people housing and helping them pay the rent when it's a little bit late, and working to make everybody's lives better. And John and I have talked a lot about the early days. Well, his days aren't as early as mine, but he went to school, high school at Lawrence Central, and I wanted to have him tell what he heard about Indiana Avenue in high school.
Thanks, Dan. As Dan said, I was born and raised in Indianapolis, went to Lawrence Central, and it was at Lawrence Central I met the first person of color that I had a conversation with. living a pretty sheltered existence out in the suburbs. And Dan and I had talked about the fact that when I was in high school, a rite of passage was to take your car, go downtown at night, and drive up Indiana Avenue. And that would be a sign of bravery if you did that.
Especially if you had the car windows open.
Right, because if you had, you probably would be had knives thrown at you and God knows what.
That was the legend. Yeah. And then when you were at Purdue, you met a guy that you had some that were eyes opening.
Yes, exactly. Although I did have one black friend at Lawrence Central, a female, and I am Facebook friends with her, and I told her that my meeting her, first impressions being what they are, gave me an understanding of people of color that sticks with me today. And I told her she should be happy about that because she helped a lot of people, I think. As Dan was saying, when I graduated from school, I was in a management training program with Indiana Bell, and one of my fellow trainees was a black fellow. His name was Julian. And Julian and I became close friends, and we would have lunch together and go out and have some beers after our training sessions and talked a lot about a lot of different things. This was in 1967, late 67, early 68. And one day, Julian said to me, John, you know, we get together and we have these conversations, and I feel kind of self-conscious because when we have these conversations, I seem to always sort of steer them toward race. I said, oh, believe me, that's fine. I'm learning a lot. And he said, well, you have to keep in mind that tomorrow, if you want to go save the whales, or tomorrow, if you want to go protest against the war in Vietnam, well, you can go ahead and do that. Tomorrow, I'm still going to be black. And that was my first instance of understanding what white privilege is all about. Because I had the privilege of doing just that. And he didn't. And again, I never forgot that either.
Well, thank you, John. And we're going to have now here, you've actually done this workshop, but Pam Blivens-Hinkle of the Spirit and Place Festival in Indiana is going to tell us how she started a really meaningful workshop that's going to be given here that is just be started out called the Charleston Syllabus. So I'd love to hear about what that is.
Sure, thanks, Dan. Well, as you know, Spirit and Place is all about leveraging the power of the arts and humanities and religion to bring people together in conversation and to make our communities better. And after a successful series of dialogues that we had in partnership with the Kepra Institute last year, we got to thinking about what kinds of conversations can we continue in this community, what sorts of conversations are needed. And in 2016, a book came out called the Charleston Syllabus. And the Charleston Syllabus began first as an online compendium of articles about race, racism, and racial violence in the U.S. And it was a response to the shooting of 9 people at Emmanuel AME Church by Dylan Roof. And the narrative that followed that terrorist act brought recognition that we weren't well informed about our own history and our own here in the U.S. And several scholars of African American history put together this online compendium, and they knew how to use social media, and they put it up on Twitter as hashtag Charleston Syllabus, and it went viral immediately. So now there is a fantastic book that's a curated version of that. And so through an opportunity presented to us by Indiana Humanities, a grant opportunity, we decided to create a program called Powerful Conversations on Race, because we really don't have too many opportunities in our community just to sit across the table or in a circle from one another to share stories. And so the program that John participated in, and also Cindy, we have trained 24 facilitators in a very specific technique that's called the Civic Reflection Dialogue Model, which is really simply a strategy for using humanities-based texts or an art object or song lyrics as a way to help us share stories and get at underlying beliefs and assumptions that we have in conversation with one another. So this is going to be a series of conversations that will launch in late August.
And as I understand, it won't just be a workshop thing where you have to go for one weekend, and so it'll be ongoing, and you can drop in on it or continue or come back or whatever.
That's exactly right. We designed it so people can experience it however they wish to. So some people may wish to start the book and come back each time and progress through the book in discussion, while other folks might like just to drop in or come in and out of it, and so people can access it on their own terms that way.
And I think I understand that it's not a curriculum or a teaching doing where you're trying to teach somebody something or have them think a different way. You're just trying to engage in, have them have conversations with the other race that they haven't had before.
That's exactly right. We are simply facilitating the conversation. We're not teaching. There's no, although the book is called the Charleston Syllabus, we don't actually have a syllabus that we're walking people through. This is simply a collection of essays and speeches and song lyrics and historical documents and a whole range of things that are designed to provoke conversation among people.
Yeah, that's great. And how will people know when they begin and where they are and all that?
In early August, we'll announce the specifics for that, and folks can go to our website, which is spiritandplace.org, and that's with the word "and" spelled out, so spiritandplace.org.
Great, that's great. Well, I had the privilege of being in on the first Spirit and Place conversation with Kurt Vonnegut and John Updike, and I know that Vonnegut would be very happy to know about this. And he wrote very often and powerfully about these issues. So that's especially great for our community. And Cindy Booth, tell us about Child Advocates and what your role is in this.
So I'm director at Child Advocates. We're the CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate Program in Indianapolis, and we represent all the children who have been victims of abuse and neglect and are brought into the child welfare system. And we do that with staff, social workers, and community volunteers.
And John and I did a workshop called Undoing Racism. Yes. And that's a different kind of workshop because it was giving people historical information. It was not so much a discussion as a teaching thing. It was very valuable. But I found that one of the things that was interesting to me in that course, which was over a weekend, there were about 40 people in the course. And it was the first time in my life I had ever been in a room where it was pretty evenly divided in races. There were about 20 black people and 20 white people. And there was a great learning experiences for that. And I was thinking, I've lived all over. I've lived in New York and Los Angeles and Miami, and I've never been in that room before. So that was quite powerful to me.
I'm glad you had that experience. We began that work in Undoing Racism about 7 years ago when we looked at the disproportionate percentage of African American children in the child welfare system. And we said, if we are the voice of the children in that system, shouldn't we look at every aspect of their lives? And that, of course, included looking at race. And we began to hear people talking about, both national organizations and individuals, recommending this workshop called Undoing Racism from the People's Institute, headquartered in New Orleans. And I would say it's a 2-day workshop where both blacks and whites will have aha moments and will learn something about race in America and institutionalized racism. And so it has improved our advocacy for children. We have a study on our website, childadvocates.net, that shows the correlation of improved advocacy and decision-making on behalf of the people who speak up for children. And we now have many people from the community coming, and I invite everyone to come to one of the workshops that we have, because it is still grant funded, so therefore it is free. And I think whether it's the activity on why are people poor, or the activity on what do you like about being black, what do you like about being white, you will have some interesting discussions in a really good circle.
Yeah, well, I know I saw a documentary about the workshop. Where will that be shown?
It's going to be shown. Our documentary called Child Advocates Undoing Racism talks about our story of why we did this workshop, and it follows 4 people going through the workshop. It's quite interesting, I think. And I think it's going to be shown on WTIU first and then WFYI.
Oh, great.
In the fall.
Great. I think that it's especially valuable. And how do people know about it? Is there a website? How do they find out?
Yes, so you can see the dates that for our next workshops on childadvocates.net. We have one workshop. We basically are doing them once a month. So I think the next one will be in August and September, the third week of September, and so on, but on our website.
And I think a lot of people don't really know what child advocates do. Could you tell us a little about that?
So we train community volunteers to go out and visit children wherever they're placed, and often they're placed with relatives if they're safe and appropriate. They may be placed still in the hospital depending on how they've come out of being abused and neglected. And we go out and visit them and ask questions about how they're doing, and talk to their teachers, because that often tells us how they're doing. Talk to their caregivers, their therapists, all of that. And we bring all of that back, whether it's a volunteer from the community or a staff person, to the judge in a report, so that the judge can make more informed decisions about that child's life.
Well, it seems to me that something essential that's being done through this Undoing Racism program with Child Advocates, and what will be done with the Charleston syllabus through Spirit in Place, is all about facilitating this conversation. And I think that it's something that the Charleston syllabus specifically, as it kind of was born of this hashtag Charleston syllabus, it's democratizing the resource collection for all of us to be able to go into conversations like this informed. But it's having those conversations that can really start to enact change. So can you talk a little bit, both of you, I guess, talk a little bit about how, what sort of tools people will be able to walk away from your programs with, to be able to continue these conversations?
Well, I'd say from the Undoing Racism workshop, it really gave us a common definition of race and racism. Through that 2-day workshop, we developed a definition within the workshop. And what it gave to our workers at Child Advocates is a common language to talk about issues of race and racism as they affect the children that we have the responsibility to represent. So it was invaluable to us, and I'll let you speak about that.
Sure. For the powerful conversations on race, we're not planning those conversations to give people tools, except that the very act of sitting in conversation with one another, I think, helps break down some of the fear that many of us have about talking about a difficult subject. And in this time, it seems to me there are many people recognize the challenge that we have around race and racism in this country, but we don't know what to do about it, and we're afraid to talk about it. So we're hoping that through this process, through reading the Charleston syllabus, that our own knowledge base and understanding of history will be expanded, but that also we'll be able then to not be fearful about being in dialogue with one another about these issues. And the world gets changed one story at a time. I mean, it's when we share our stories with one another that our eyes get opened. So these facilitated dialogues are space for us to listen to other people's experiences and their own stories and their own understanding that's provoked by the readings in the book.
Yeah, I'm really proud that Indianapolis is doing this, is making these things available. And I've been reading a lot of James Baldwin again recently, and really one of the shocking things is the things he said in 1964 about the difficulties of this society with race. Almost all of them are true today. But one thing that speaks to the work you're doing, and I wanted to read that Baldwin said, because it seems so pertinent to the work you're doing. He said, everything now, we must assure, is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. If we, the conscious blacks, the few conscious whites, like lovers, insist on and create the consciousness of the others, if we do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country. That's such a great concept to me, the idea of achieving this country. And that's what you guys are helping to foster. So I really thank you very much. Also, I would like for Tasha to close with a reading of one of our great Indianapolis poets, a brief poem by Mari Evans. Tasha?
This is a verse from the poem Alabama Landscape by Mari Evans. Black man running through the ageless sun and shadow. History repeated past all logic. Who is it bides the time and why? And for how long? Mari Evans, Alabama Landscape.
Uncle Dan's Story Hour was recorded live at the legendary Red Key Tavern in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was made possible in part by the amazing beer brewery and faithful listeners like you. Thank you for your support on this journey. Special thanks to writer Uncle Dan Wakefield, host Cy Bennett from Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, powerful guests Tasha Jones, Aleta Hodge, John Myers, Pam Blivens-Hinkle, and Cynthia Booth, saxophonist Sophie Faught, creative consultant and senior lecturer at Indiana University, Ann Ryder, producers Michael Therwechter and Pat Chastain, and many thanks to Jim, Dolly, and Leslie Settle and the fantastic staff at the legendary Red Key Tavern. Thanks, Allie O'Hara, for working the front door. You're a wonderful person. Our amazing recording engineer for this episode was the masterful Steve McQuarrie. Our graphic designer is the extremely talented Sarah Bushman. Our production manager is the very skilled Matt Pelzer. The WFYI program director is the wonderful Roxana Caldwell. Uncle Dan's Story Hour was created by Michael Therwechter and Uncle Dan Wakefield. Thanks for listening, everyone.